Well, Oliver Reginald Tambo studied at St. Peter's Secondary School. He returned to St. Peter's in 1942 as a science and mathematics teacher. St. Peter's opened him up to a new world. It also exposed him to racial prejudice and segregation. It's also a place where his love for education was indeed nurtured. The following package looks at one of the spaces that moulded a young Oliver Tambo.
St. Peter's Secondary School in Rosettenville, now called St. Martin's, is said to have shaped the young mind of Oliver Tambo. Tambo, who started his schooling in rural Mpondoland in the Eastern Cape, received a scholarship to St. Peter's in 1934 after his excellent performance as a student in Standard 6.
At that point, his father was struggling. He had an older brother who was working in the coal mines in Natal, who sent some money, and there were the kind ladies, the Goddard sisters from England, who sent some money, but it wasn't enough. So, and then suddenly St. Peter's accepted him on a scholarship, and so he arrived very, very excited, and for the first time basically crossed the Ngeli Mountains to another world. St. Peter's was a world of pupils who spoke many languages, even an Indian and a coloured, and people from all over South Africa and beyond South Africa.
Despite his early setbacks in life, Tambo excelled in his schooling.
He was deeply a rural person, coming to quite an urban environment, although at that time St. Peter's, the school we're in now, which is called St. Martin's, was in the bush. It was on the edge of Joburg. That didn't stop normal schoolboy antics into the town, I'm sure. But it was difficult for a rural boy to come into what was basically an urban environment. But he settled in. He obviously did. He did well. Students at that time wrote the exams of the Joint Matriculation Board, which were the premier exams at that time, written by the white schools of that era, the white private schools. And that was a tough thing too, because it wasn't a departmental exam. It was an exam that was considered to be as it were, the Rolls Royce. And he prospered.
Tambo then went to Fort Hare University, where he embarked on a Bachelor of Science degree. He then enrolled for a postgraduate degree in teaching. But Tambo was expelled before he could complete the qualification for organizing a student protest in the institution. The news of his expulsion soon reached his old school, St. Peter's. They immediately offered him a post as a maths teacher. Over the next few years, Tambo made an enduring impact on his students at St. Peter's. He inspired many. After hours, he introduced the concept of the ANC Youth League to his senior students. Some of them went on to join the movement and become prominent comrades like Rivonia trialist Andrew Mlangeni.
I went to St. Peter's, where I met OR. OR was also my teacher in mathematics and science. OR and them and many others went to Fort Hare, and once they are there, they became politically conscious. So when they come back to come and teach in the colleges, they already started to influence us.
He gave up teaching to study law in 1948, but politics eventually took over his life. In 1960, he went into exile to fight for the liberation of South Africa. Decades after he left St. Peter's, a new generation of learners are still inspired by him.
As a young South African, I feel so privileged to be in St. Martin's School, a place where he walked the very grounds we did, and to be able to live on his legacy of where he studied, where he was able to gain an education. I think I'm very privileged and proud to be part of that narrative.
In 1991, after his return from exile, Tambo and Father Trevor Huddleston went to visit his alma mater, and they were received with warm hands.
He and Archbishop Huddleston came to the school, and it was the dead of winter. It was a freezing cold day. We even had a fire in my office in the fireplace. We haven't had one since. And these were two old gentlemen sitting there chatting. They then went for a walk around the school. They looked at the school library, which had been the community of the resurrections, the priests' precinct, their library, where they did their reflection and meditations and so on. And they talked to students at the time, they talked to some of the workers. It left a very strong impression on the staff at the time that this was a man who had a great deal to offer South Africa.
An office in the school building where Tambo slept and studied is still intact. The office has now been turned into an IT room, but it's still one of the treasured places of the school. Decades after Tambo left St. Peter's and after his passing, his legacy still lives on. Zinzi Swamani, SABC News, Johannesburg.